Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball! Welcome back to the Don Sullivan Show, everyone. Thank you for again listening. This is the show where we discuss all things science, technology, and computing on a level that can be understood and absorbed by your average teenager. I am your host, Don Sullivan, but allow me to introduce you to, again, my partner, the new folk hero of podcasting, Mr. Jersey Steve. Say hello, Steve.
Greetings from New Jersey, everyone. I'm excited to dive into today's topic. In the meantime, please support our producer by visiting axtinc.com. That is AXTINK.com. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation, as well as run our website, all while researching a cure for baldness. Great guy.
And today, Steve, we are recording from beautiful and glamorous Las Vegas. Well, actually, a parking lot in Denny's near the Strip. I am teasing that because at the end of this episode, I'm going to tell you about what our next recording is going to be. So today, yeah, it's going to be great. Wait till you see it, Steve. You don't even know about it yet. Today, we are going to discuss security and communications. How you can ensure that your private conversations and messages stay private. Is it really possible? Can the CIA hear your conversations? Can we hear theirs? Just kidding. Kind of. More importantly, more seriously, can any conversations really stay private? And with that cheery sentiment, I want to introduce my long-term friend, one of the most brilliant people in Silicon Valley, Mr. Jeff Francis. Let me tell you a little bit about Jeff. Jeff knows about as much about computing technology as anybody I have ever had the pleasure and privilege of working with. One of the things I've always said about Jeff is that networks just start behaving themselves when Jeff enters the room. He says, I didn't do anything, but for some reason, things just start working right when he enters the room. And I'll tell you that Jeff is a newfound sports fan. Jeff is also by marriage a newfound Detroit Lions fan, and he has tolerated my sports analogies for decades. But before we get to this, I do have to, at our lawyer's insistence, read out the obligatory disclaimer waiver, and it's really relatively simple. But all statements by the host and guests of the Don Sullivan Show are the personal opinions of the host and guests, all who agree that the following content is the property of Zanalytics LLC to be used publicly and exclusively on the Don Sullivan Show. So, Jeff, did I get your introduction right? Anything else you want to say about yourself before we get into this very apropos and important conversation about today's events?
Well, after knowing you for close to 30 years now, I certainly know you never exaggerate. So, sure, that's just about right.
That's just about right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, I think it's true. Just anybody who wants to know, just walk into a room with Jeff, and networks just work, and then when he leaves, they stop working. That's what happens. I'm telling you. All right. So, Jeff, let's start off this conversation. And I really would like you to, in a serious way, please tell the audience about the general state of security and encryption in communications apps. Are they safe to use? Are any of them safe to use?
Yes-ish. So it's one of those questions that's, people hate engineers when they equivocate and say, well, it depends. And the honest answer is it does depend. It depends on who you're trying to keep your conversation safe from. Whether that's your kids, your spouse, your company, your government, the NSA, The answer is different depending on which one of those things you're aiming for. But overall, for the vast majority of people, 99% of people who are not terrorists, government officials, anything else, the answer is unequivocally yes. However, if you fall into one of those categories where your opponent might be a very large corporation, a nation state, something along those lines, the answer gets a little more nuanced and a little more complicated.
Well, we're going to get into that, I think, and we're going to get into it with some specific references. And of course, in the news lately, we've all heard um, different situations arising with the app known as Signal. And of course, Telegram is out there, and there are a number of others. But let me ask you more specifically, um, given the fact that encryption has been around since the 40s and 50s, just using prime numbers or pretty classic and simple hashing algorithms and so on. But it's so much more sophisticated now with, I guess, 128-bit encryption or higher. Is it possible to really break through the encryption of these higher end but commercially available, sometimes free apps?
Yeah, sort of. Okay, so first of all, encryption's actually much older than that. There's a old form of encryption called the Caesar cipher that came from Julius Caesar that was actually used to encrypt battlefield communications. I don't remember when Caesar lived, but a couple thousand years ago, something like that.
31 BC, the Battle of Actium.
You would know that. Yes, you would. So encryption, there's just like the question of are apps safe, the question about encryption being safe is another nuanced answer. First of all, there's quantum computing, which is coming, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit later, but I'll save it for later. That's a complete game changer in the world of crypto, and there's a lot of really interesting ins and outs and side stories there. Encryption itself in its modern form is essentially effectively unbreakable, right? Even the most powerful computer in the world that exists today, barring quantum computers, the most powerful machines that actually exist, the crypto itself can be truly unbreakable. But there's more to the story than that. There's the mathematics behind the actual cryptography. Then there's the software that implements those algorithms into code, into the program you actually run, and there can be errors there. There can be mistakes. There can be weaknesses in the implementation of the mathematics, even if the mathematics themselves is perfect. Then there's the operating system that your software runs on. For example, let's make the assumption that I'm running cryptography that is absolutely unbreakable, with an absolutely flawless implementation, with no bugs and no errors and no weaknesses in the software itself. If I'm running malware on your computer and I can read your keyboard and I can get images of your screen, it doesn't matter how perfect your cryptography is. Last but not least, every geek's favorite cartoon in the world is called XKCD. It's been published for years. It's really funny. And there was one published about 10 years ago about the crypto nerd's dream. And the crypto nerd is talking about he has his laptop encrypted with 4096-bit encryption, and it would take $1 billion supercomputer to crack this encryption. And a guy comes along and says, I have a $5 wrench, and I'm going to beat it out of you. So that's another really important aspect of cryptography, is it's not just about the software. Going back to what you just talked about the Signal breach, that wasn't a problem with Signal. In this case, there was nothing whatsoever wrong with Signal. There was nothing wrong with the phones it was running on. There was nothing wrong with those things. It was human error. So it's not just a simple yes/no answer. Yes, the cryptography is.
Yeah, we're assuming it was an error. Of course, there could have been something much more nefarious, but we'll leave that one alone for the moment.
Well, actually, let's not leave that alone, because there actually is a known bug that just popped up in Signal in the last couple of weeks. It's been fixed, but the bug is that somebody could send you a malformed message with a QR code in it, and you could click on it, and it would not accidentally, it would deliberately add that person as a valid user of your Signal account. And reportedly, the Russians were using this against high-profile targets. So it's actually not impossible. Now, I don't think Jeffrey Goldberg is a Russian agent, but it's technically not impossible. These bugs do exist, and in fact, there is a known bug that was just fixed in Signal that corresponds with this.
And of course, Occam's razor would say that somebody just did it on purpose as well, without the executives who don't know the way around the apps at all, not knowing it or not realizing it, and then not paying
Right.
attention, at least during the time that really mattered. All that Bachelor situation, all the Don Sullivan show audience knows that very, very well. So, in other words, if you don't accidentally add an enemy into your chat group, you ought to be okay. Yeah, I'm just saying. It's I'm I also wonder, and I also wonder if there is a need for multi-factor authentication on these highest levels of security before you actually make a change to any groups that are at least flagged as really high security, or change to anything for that matter.
Well, okay, so I argue there's two pieces to that. Piece number one is it doesn't matter how secure your communications are. If you've got them on your iPhone and you haven't put a passcode or a password or a PIN number or face recognition on your iPhone, and any random person can walk up in your house and pick up your phone and read your messages, again, it doesn't matter how secure the application is. You have to secure the device that reads that. And multi-factor authentication is certainly a piece of that. The other thing multi-factor authentication does is it forces you to slow down and think for a minute. And if we take this whole Signal breach completely at face value, let's just assume for the moment that everything happened precisely as it was stated to happen. The reality is somebody probably just added an extra person in a hurry to the group chat without thinking about it. Multi-factor authentication would not have made that any more secure. But what it could have done is slowed down the user long enough to think about what they're doing and look at the screen before they click OK.
It's like sending an email to the wrong person at the end of the day.
It is.
Well, we are the name of this particular episode is Reply All, and we're going to get to that part of the discussion here in a minute. As well, because obviously we have all done that, and we have all dealt with that embarrassment. So, Jeff, are there any other? I mean, obviously Signal now. Many of us who are in this industry have used Signal for a long time. The general public knows about Telegram for other reasons, which we won't go into. And there are others, but is there anything else that you really recommend that you were using now, or you think should be used on the highest level of security concerns as opposed to those apps?
So I like Signal, and there's a lot of reasons I like Signal. One of the reasons was early on, Snowden recommended it. And whatever you might think of Snowden, either positive or negative, you have to acknowledge that he's a really smart guy who knows what's going on. And if Snowden used Signal to initially reach out for the very first time to a journalist and continues to recommend it today, that says something interesting about Signal.
He must trust it. That was Glenn Greenwald he reached out to on Signal,
Yes,
right?
It was Glenn Greenwald. It was, yes. And Maura Petraeus, I believe her name was. So that's one interesting thing. Number two interesting thing, the fact that the Vice President of the United States was communicating using Signal. I find that compelling. I find that interesting.
The CIA recommended it. The CIA put it on their apps.
Well, okay, so point number three, Signal is included in the default laptop build and desktop computer build for CIA employees. And number three, the EU Commission, who's essentially the government of Europe at this point, uses and recommends it for their own high-level internal communication. So there's a lot of things to be said for Signal. We can also jump over to the side that it's open source, and anyone can look at the source code and look at what's going on. Now, that doesn't necessarily guarantee security. 999 out of 1,000 people will look at that source code and it's meaningless. But there are people who look at that code who know what they're doing and can validate that, yeah, this looks good. I know the mathematics, I know the cryptography, I know all these things. I can validate that it looks good. By the way, I think it's important to note, Signal was allowed by the US government, and we all know that this breach happened under Trump. This actually happened under Biden. I'm sorry, a breach did not happen under Biden. Biden actually was the one to allow Signal to be used for purposes like this. So this isn't a political thing. This isn't a Trump picked a bad app. Biden picked the same app. Biden actually originally authorized this. So it was a mistake. It was a human mistake. It was an avoidable mistake. It was probably an inevitable mistake. That's one of the reasons why government entities use their own proprietary apps, not because they're safer, but because they can't accidentally include journalists from the Atlantic, because they don't have access to this application to begin with. So going...
No, finish up, Jeff, please.
Well, I was going to say, going back to your original question, the other common apps that you find in use are Telegram and WhatsApp. And iMessage. We can't ever forget that iMessage is actually an encrypted communication system. It's not just text messaging the way we've thought about text messaging for 30 years.
So through Apple, the default Apple.
The default Apple iMessage on the iPhone is actually an encrypted messaging application, just like Signal, just like WhatsApp, just like Telegram. It simply has an additional feature where it can also send and receive text messages to non-iMessage users. So it's important to keep that in the same bucket. I don't like Telegram personally for the main reason that messages are not end-to-end encrypted by default. They're encrypted from the end user to the server, where they're decrypted, and then they're re-encrypted at the server to the other user. They're not encrypted end-to-end, which means in English that a breach of their server could disclose all of your messages. Yes.
Spills all the beans. Yeah.
Spills all the beans. WhatsApp is incredibly popular. WhatsApp is encrypted, supposedly end-to-end. We don't have source code for it. You can't prove that. And there's a couple interesting things there. Number one, they're owned by Facebook. And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I trust my secrets to Facebook.
I'll invite Zuckerberg on here to see if we can get Zuck on to comment at some point. So go ahead, Jeff.
Well, in their licensing agreement, if you carefully, nobody ever reads licensing agreements, right? You just click, yeah, whatever, click, I accept.
Nobody like 30 pages,
right. But if you read the WhatsApp licensing agreement that you're signing or digitally signing and agreeing to, it actually says that Facebook is allowed to use the content of your WhatsApp messages for their own purposes. To me, that tells me that WhatsApp is probably not entirely self-contained. It's not entirely end-to-end encrypted. Something leaks out somewhere because Meta explicitly put in a clause in their licensing that says they can use the content of your messages.
That's interesting, huh?
So, Jeff, just to let you know, as you know, for many, many years, I have had to read a lot of actual Oracle licensing agreements. So, yes, I do that. I have done that before.
But Don, we all know you're not normal.
No, most people don't.
I'll get back to my baseball analogies here in a minute. And Steve, I am really disappointed in you, by the way. Earlier, you did not correct me on my Caesarian comment. It was the Ides of March happened in 44 BC, I think, and that's when Caesar was killed. But so, Jeff, it goes back even 15 years further than you were.
Okay, there we go.
All right. So, but let me get back as I digress way too much here. How, without getting too into the weeds, how does modern encryption really work? Is it as simple as saying it's 256-bit encryption with a really sophisticated hashing algorithm somewhere wrapping around it.
That's all true. There's a little more to it than that. So, depending on which type of encryption you're using, 128 bits might be ridiculously weak or ridiculously strong. So, bits are not equivalent across all types of encryption. That's one thing to understand. We're talking pre-quantum. We got to talk about quantum later because it's really interesting, quantum computing and the things that are coming with that. But with typical encryption as it's used today, there's three general categories that encryption fall into. There's factorization, discrete logarithms, and elliptic curve. So let's do the simple one first, the one that's relatively easy to understand, and that's factorization. So if I give you the number 12, what are the numerical factors of 12? What times what equals 12? Come on, Don, you can do this.
3 and 4.
It's a
2 and
test.
6.
3 and 4,
but
4 isn't prime. So it's 2 times 2 times 3. Those are the prime factors of 12.
Yeah.
No, because 4 isn't prime, and they got to be prime factors.
They all be prime.
Boy,
okay. They got to all be prime. So
now we're getting
1 times 2 times 2 times 3. Okay, that's the the prime factorization of 12.
All right, I failed the first test there. All right, let's go on. See if you can get me again. I'll take you back later. All right.
Right. So a lot of modern encryption is based on prime numbers. The difference is that prime number you can factor in your head. Well, all of us but Don can factor in our head.
Why is that, Jeff? Why are they based on?
So this gets a little deeper than you probably want to go to into the math on this show. Let me jump ahead and then we'll circle back to that.
No worries.
When you're doing factorization with encryption, you're not using simple, the number 12 that you can do in your head. You're using numbers that might be literally 1,000 digits long. And the reason that's safe and secure is factoring a number is one of these mathematical problems that is actually very, very hard to do. It's very tedious. The method for factoring is well known. It's been known, the sieve of Arithmenes has been known for literally 2,000 years. But even though it's been known for 2,000 years, it still takes the fastest computers in the world longer than the life left in the universe to factor a 4,096-bit prime number, because it's just a lot of grunt work over and over. A lot of encryption is based on knowing you can create a number like that very easily. You can't break it back down into its constituent parts without an enormous amount of work. That asymmetry between how hard it is to make versus how hard it is to break down is the mathematical piece that a lot of encryption is based on. Again, they also do the same thing with discrete logarithms. They also do the same thing with elliptic curves. It's easy to generate an elliptic curve mathematically and pick points along that curve because I know what the curve is. And I can pick points along that curve and use those as part of my encryption. But it's effectively impossible for you to look at a series of points I've generated and reconstruct the curve from those points. So encryption is all about the asymmetry of the difficulty in solving a math problem. So any math problem that is really simple to do one way and really incredibly almost impossible to reverse and go backwards on and do the opposite direction is a good candidate for encryption. And that's what a lot of our encryption today is based on.
That was a great explanation, actually, and it's something that I did not understand. And I probably still don't, but at least I have the basic idea.
So Bruce Schneier wrote a book on this called Applied Cryptography. It's about 25 years old, but it is by far the best, most accessible, easy to read. Well, parts of it aren't easy to read, but it's a great introduction on the standards of modern cryptography. It's a fantastic book.
So sort of digressing off into something I know the audience is interested in. And we're going to have a series of shows, episodes of the Don Sullivan Show on this. What about blockchain? Other than mining, is blockchain in danger? Do crypto enthusiasts need to worry?
So the best answer I can give you is I don't know. I have a deep and abiding interest, both personally and professionally, in cryptography and encryption and security and all these things. I have literally zero interest whatsoever in crypto mining and crypto coin and crypto investing and all those other things that share the same, 5-letter crypto, to start out with, but they're a totally different field. I can only assume that the people who are building these systems are well aware of the state of modern cryptography and use modern systems, modern algorithms, modern everything. But I know next to nothing about that field.
It's really just, like I said, we're going to have a bunch of episodes on this, but it's really a question of how truly secure is a blockchain transaction. In We know that they can be mined, we know that they can be discovered, but we also know that they can be lost forever too. So I
Yes.
didn't mean to digress too much into
Oh,
all of that, but that's just sort of a peripheral aspect of this that
it is. And it's based on the same cryptographic principles. It's just a
yeah.
part of the landscape that I have never bothered to explore because it doesn't interest me.
So getting back to what we're really trying to focus on here, Steve, and you will like this is, obviously we all make mistakes. Adding accidental names to chat groups, like the most important people in the world can do apparently at any given point in time. Mixing up names, by just making a mistake when you reference Joe in your reply list and don't realize it's a different Joe than you intended. And of course, the dreaded reply all, which I at least 3 times in my life, and I remember them, really wanted to reach through the internet and pull them back and had to deal with serious egg on my face. But other than those obvious faux pas, give the audience some advice on how their everyday communication should be conducted behaviorally. We talked before about the two-factor or multi-factor communication, at least causing everyone who is everyone and anyone to think about what they're doing before they actually take that action. But what else? What else should they
Well,
do?
so that feature is actually not a feature in any encrypted chat program I'm aware of. None of them actually make you stop, force you to stop and think about what you're doing. But that is in fact exactly what I would recommend is we all get used to knowing exactly what keys to hit on the keyboard, and we say, add Bob to this, and we automatically hit the 7 keys we need to add Bob to this with no further thought whatsoever. And the reason exactly. The reason those extra keys were added in there was to try to force you to slow down and think about what you're doing. When it says, "Are you sure it's this Bob you want?" None of us even read that. We just click yes.
Yep,
it's like
totally true.
It's
something that is something that Venmo does sometimes. If is it sure? Are you sure you want to send money to this person? I think because money is involved, obviously, they'll ask you to put in their phone number sometimes, so that they have a checkpoint there. But yeah, I don't think Telegram, Signal, or I mean,
well, I think this could be that proverbial teachable moment for all of those apps to consider adding that as a feature.
Well, so I use a public cloud provider for some of the testing and stuff I do. And you can add machines willy-nilly, right? You just click a button and you spin up a new instance of a server instantaneously. But when you want to delete a server, it forces you to type in the name of the server explicitly and then click OK. That is the essence of forcing the user to stop and think about what they're doing before they just use muscle memory to automatically click through things. I am not a user interface guy, right? I'm a software guy, I'm an architecture guy, I'm all those things, but I'm not a user interface guy. But it seems reasonable and logical to me that before you can add someone to a group chat, perhaps you have to type in their whole name or you have to type in their phone number, or you have to do something that forces you to stop and focus on precisely what you're doing and deliberately slow down your progress and break that muscle memory habit. That seems
They
a
could have,
logical addition.
yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, they have a version where I don't know about a version, but if you marked a certain group as extra secure or something like that, there could be
Yes,
an additional
yes,
check or
yes.
checkpoint to add someone, because we all move really fast. We all have really
Right.
short attention spans, and we've all done what Don described before, sending emails to the wrong people, adding somebody, or, you think you're just talking smack about somebody, but you reply to all. So, I mean, it
Yep.
happens.
Yes.
Oh, I've done it.
So
All right.
going
Oh,
back to
yeah.
your question, my answer to that question is stop and think, slow down. Don't fly through things that have potentially disastrous consequences. Stop and think about what you're doing before you add Bob to that highly
Such a
secure.
such a simple piece of advice that you give to everybody in every aspect of all their lives.
Well, it's easy to
The,
say, but it's so hard to do, right? I
well,
Yeah.
recognize that.
I'll go back to the sports analogies, particularly baseball. One of the things that happens in all sports is that as you move from level to level, the only thing about that sport that really changes is that it moves faster. It moves faster. And the greatest of athletes, I always use Derek Jeter as an example with this, are able to slow things down in their heads so that they are able to understand the ramifications of the situation as presenting itself on a nanosecond level almost, right? And what you're saying there is the perfect advice for life and everything that you're doing. So, don't mean to get philosophical here, but it's true. It's sort of circle of life all the way back around to what we're dealing with here in modern today's this week's news, at least. So let's step on to a different subject. But go
All
ahead, Steve.
right.
You want to add anything? He doesn't.
No, I was going to agree 100% with you.
Yeah.
There are things you can add, with the software on the apps to make people stop, but it's also an individual and kind of a social thing. We can decide to do that ourselves.
So, Jeff, we're gonna switch up here, and we're gonna have also multiple, probably a whole series. And if you haven't been turned off too much by the Don Sullivan Show at this point, I'm going to ask you to come on and um, and have a conversation along these lines. But we've got a number of people lined up already. Let's talk about quantum computing. It just seems like science fiction to most people, even those of us. I have a degree in physics, and I spent a whole year studying the Schrodinger equation and commutators and all the math around that. And I don't know what a qubit is. Somebody, Tony Foster, mentioned that in a couple of episodes ago. So tell us, other than the fact that the whole power of computing is going to change by 5 orders of magnitude in so many different ways. Tell us what you think that is going to do in the next few years to affect our situation with this encryption, this whole conversation we're having.
Sure. Sure. So let me start out with the observation that when you're talking about security and cryptography and security of operating systems and applications and algorithms, it's really, really critical to understand that what's true today might be entirely false tomorrow. This is a very fast moving field. Breakthroughs in decryption and breaking encryption and mathematics and computing are literally happening week to week. And weaknesses are found, and new techniques of computing are found, and new techniques of maybe finding prime factors of a number are found. All these things are found, and things change all the time. Quantum computing is probably the biggest, most visible piece of that we have facing us today. So the good news is mathematicians have come up with cryptography that they believe to be quantum resistant. is what they call it, resistant to decryption by quantum computers. Because even though we don't yet have useful quantum computers, we have prototypes that demonstrate the principles that do work. Microsoft just announced, they had a big announcement last week about their new computer. Now, there are a lot of people who know a lot who are throwing shade on that and saying this may not be all they're advertising it to be. You know, maybe this is maybe not quite fraudulent, but maybe not quite also what they're saying. We don't know, right? We'll know a year from now, maybe. But Google's working on it, IBM's working on it, Microsoft is working on it. The important thing to understand is what you just said, is it's multiple orders of magnitude more computing power we can throw at a problem. So let me translate that into English. Factorization of numbers suddenly goes from it would take 4 billion years to factor this number to I can have it for you in 3 seconds. So encryption based on that technology goes away. It disappears. It's no longer effective. We know how to make quantum resistant algorithms, right? We've got them and we're using them, and industry is slowly moving over to those. But here's the problem. The NSA, and this is just one example of many, but we'll pick the obvious elephant in the room. The NSA has built a computing facility, a data storage facility near Salt Lake City, Utah. It's literally takes acres. It's got exabytes of data storage. Now, I realize that number might not mean a lot to people. Everyone knows what a gigabyte is, right? It's 1 billion bytes in round numbers. A terabyte is 1,000 billion bytes. A petabyte is 1,000,000 billion bytes. Okay, we're talking exabytes here. Exabytes are 1 billion billion bytes. It's data storage at a level that's incomprehensible.
It sounds like the national debt, but go ahead.
Yes, it is. So why does this matter to cryptography? Well, the purpose of this, it's called the Utah Data Center. It's run by the NSA. The purpose of this thing is to record all of the traffic on the internet and record it and save it on hard drives. Literally billions of gigabytes of data are being stored onto hard drives. And you look at that and you go, well, who cares? I can't read that. Nobody
The AI modelers care. That's who cares.
Well, no, because nobody can read the data. Now,
what's the point of it?
Well, that's what I'm getting to. So point number one is there is value in metadata, right? There is value in understanding the pattern of connections between machines, even if you can't read the traffic. And they're getting current value from that, presumably today. But the real value of this is the day is coming, and the day is getting closer every year, every week, of what they're calling the quantum apocalypse. So the quantum apocalypse is the theoretical day. They also call it like Y2Q and Q day. There's all these names for it. The day when quantum computers actually become effective and useful as a day-to-day thing. You know the U.S. government's going to be one of the first acquirers of this, right? They have the second Cray computer ever built went to Lawrence Livermore Labs. They buy supercomputers by the truckload. Now they've got these billions upon billions of bytes of old recorded encrypted data that they can't read. Now they've got quantum supercomputers who can now trivially sort through the last 30 years of internet traffic and read all of it. That's a really interesting problem that we're facing, right? All these things that...
Or opportunity.
Well, depends on which side of the fence you're on, right?
Yeah.
But all these things that we were told 20 years ago that this encryption is unbreakable and it will take longer than the life of the universe to crack this encryption, all that's about to go away sometime in the next few years.
This sounds like a Netflix special waiting to happen.
It is. So all these secret things, all these secrets that have been buried for 1 or 5 or 25 years, all of a sudden are going to be open to conceivably the world, right? The world doesn't have exabytes of stored internet data, but your company might have the last 5 years of all your internet traffic. And 5 years from now, if they can afford to buy a quantum supercomputer, they can read it. And you might find yourself in hot water for something you did 10 years ago that, was encrypted and safe forever, and all of a sudden it's not. So the quantum apocalypse is kind of expected to change the world. Now, all the encryption or a certain percentage of the encryption we're doing today will not fall prey to that, right? We've got quantum safe encryption now, but 5 years ago we didn't. So anything older than that, we'll be able to read in just a couple more years.
It's just such a race. One part of the whole equation goes in one direction, and another part goes in a direction of actually uncovering what the first one did, and so on.
Yes.
And who can stay ahead? Who can stay ahead?
But that's why you have to be careful with this. And even today with Signal, you have to stop and think, should I really put this in a permanent stored format that who knows what, we couldn't envision quantum computers 20 years ago. 20 years from now, what's going to be the next leap? And will that be resistant? Will the encryption we're using today be resistant to the technology we invent in 2050?
So somewhere Niels Bohr and Einstein are both looking down, laughing their heads at us, saying,
"That's right." That's right. And Heisenberg, he's one of every cryptologist's favorites.
Heisenberg too, yeah.
Yes.
And we're not talking about Breaking Bad Heisenberg. We're talking about the real Heisenberg, right?
Indeed.
So Jeff, let's end this discussion up for now, because we're going to have a lot more of these, I hope. And again, if we haven't turned you off to the Don Sullivan Show too much, we're going to have you back on probably, if you want, every quarter or so to update us on both encryption and quantum computing and separately. But let me ask you to put your Marlin hat on here, and let's do some prediction. Where do you see this in a year?
In a year. So
yeah,
this is changing gears probably more than you anticipate. This is not really a technology question. I don't anticipate any major changes in the technology in the next year. What I do anticipate are political changes.
If you look, really? Why would you think that?
So let's take the two big ones, England and Russia. England and Russia are both have laws on the books that require the government to be able to decrypt any communication. There are other countries that do as well. So, for example, just to pick one of many, Apple is actually seriously considering stopping doing business in England rather than comply with the mandate that Apple be able to decrypt your messages.
I saw that article. Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah. And, here's a corollary that goes along with this. For a long time, people thought I believe it was either Telegram or WhatsApp. Don't quote me on this. It was one or the other. For a long time, people believed they were actually quite secure, and they were banned by the Russian government. And then all of a sudden, a new release of the software came out, and Russia dropped their ban on that software. That was an interesting week in cryptography, because the question is, what happened that made these formerly inaccessible or disallowed applications that presumably the government could not read your data, but it was mandated by law, and all of a sudden, suddenly Russia changed its mind and decided they were fine? The implication there is that they either found a way to decrypt it or secured some sort of a deal with the company to put a back door in it so they could get the data they wanted. Now, that's since been reversed, and they've been banned again, but that was an interesting moment a couple of years ago in cryptography. So a year from now, the issue isn't really, can we do secure end-to-end communication? That the state of that will be essentially where it is today. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can't see any major breakthroughs changing the state of what's going on today. But the political climate could force providers of these services to provide backdoors into the system.
Wow. Yeah, things are going to be very, very interesting here as we move along in the next 2 to 4 and beyond years in that respect.
Well, let me throw you another fun curveball.
There you go, Jeff, with the baseball analogy. I love it.
I got one. I finally used a sports analogy for the first time in my life. So one of the proposed solutions to this, the new Android phones, the new iPhones all have AI chips on them, right? That can do presumably all this cool, at least LLM stuff, if not perhaps, general intelligence sometime in the next couple of years. The proposal is to do an end run around this being able to decrypt the data by having the AI on your phone analyze your messages. Because by definition, the operating system of your phone can read your keyboard and read your screen. So it completely bypasses all the encryption. And the AI on your phone can be used to see if you're doing something bad that needs to be reported to the government.
Jeff, this sounds like there's almost a possibility of a requirement that your phone will be spying on you.
Remember, anything that can be used by the government for supposed purposes of good can be used by a bad actor for purposes of bad. There is no such thing as a feature that only works for good. If the government can read your traffic, the quote unquote bad guys can read your traffic. There's no such thing as a government only way to spy on your messages.
Yeah, we learned that with dynamite, right? Dynamite.
There you go.
It sounds like that would defeat the entire purpose. It's, using AI, it's got to send it somewhere and then they can see what you're doing.
Well, okay, so the argument, I'm going to play devil's advocate. The argument here is the AI is running locally on your phone. The data is not being passed back to Apple or Google or whoever for analysis. It's actually being analyzed on your phone. That's the argument. But again, this goes back to any loophole that can be exploited for good can be equally exploited for evil. So I would argue that if you have that feature on your phone to do local analysis, the only thing preventing that data from being sent off your phone to some commercial entity or government is the choice whether or not to do that.
Well, on that cheery note again, I think we're going to have to end this episode. And I really want to thank my friend and colleague, Jeff Francis, for coming on to tell us all about at least the initial stages, because we're going to have a lot of episodes and we're going to discuss this a lot of the state of encryption. And then also, again, to tease us with these future discussions we're going to have on quantum computing. So, Jersey Steve, you got anything else to add there?
No, this was fascinating. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and thanks for joining us today, Jeff.
You're very welcome. I look forward to coming back.
I thank you, Jeff. And folks, again, thank you all in the vast audience of the Don Sullivan Show. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. And once again, remember that all at-bats are situational.